Chablais, border between France and Switzerland, September 1594. The night is pitch black and the cold is biting. A 26-year-old man is tied to the branches of a tree, 3 meters above the ground, with his frozen fingers clutching the ropes, struggling not to fall asleep. Below him, 7 wolves howl as they circle the tree, waiting. Every breath forms a white cloud in the freezing air. The branches creak in the wind. He looks down and sees hungry eyes glowing in the darkness. 5 hours. He needs to hold on for 5 hours until dawn. But he is there, in that region of 30,000 inhabitants where only 20 Catholics remain, on a mission that everyone considered a suicide mission. And then something happens that no one expected. At dawn, a couple of Calvinist peasants find the man shivering with cold in the tree, and instead of letting him die, they save him. Even more impossible. Touched by his gentleness, they convert to Catholicism. They become the first of 72,000. This is the story of St. Francis de Sales, the man who transformed murderous wolves into the gateway for the largest conversion in modern history. From a tree surrounded by death, the conversion that no one thought possible would be born. But to understand how a nobleman ended up tied to a tree surrounded by wolves, we need to go back in time. August 21st, 1567, Sales Castle, Savoy. Francis is born, the firstborn of 13 children in one of the most noble families in the region. His mother, a devout countess, prays that God will preserve him from all corruption. His father, a powerful baron, has other plans: the magistracy, wealth, and an arranged marriage. The boy grows up among lessons in philosophy, rhetoric, fencing, and horse riding. At 6 years old, he is already studying. At 11, he asks for the tonsure, the first step toward religious life. The father resists but partially gives in. Paris, Jesuit College of Clermont, 10 years of solid formation. But at 18 years old, something breaks. A theological discussion on predestination convinces Francis that he is condemned to hell. The certainty devours him. He loses his appetite, cannot sleep, and becomes so ill that he is bedridden. Weeks of torment, until in December 1586, he crawls to the old parish of Saint-Étienne-de-Grès in Paris. He kneels before the image of Our Lady of Good Deliverance, and there, in an act of total surrender, he whispers, "Whatever happens, Lord, let me at least love you in this life if I cannot do so in eternity." Peace returns, the crisis passes. But there is something more. That experience of despair shaped in him an impossible gentleness, a deep understanding of human suffering. He graduates in law with honors. He returns home. His father arranges a position as a senator and a wealthy bride. Francis refuses everything. December 18th, 1593, priestly ordination, 26 years of age. And then, in 1594, the Duke of Savoy makes a request to the Bishop of Geneva. "I need missionaries for Chablais. The region has been dominated by Calvinists for 60 years. Out of 30,000 inhabitants, only 20 Catholics remain who barely dare to profess their faith. Churches are destroyed, crosses torn down, and villages burned. It is a suicide mission." The bishop asks the clergy, "Does anyone volunteer?" Silence. No one wants it, except for a young priest who kneels and says, "If you believe I can be useful in this mission, give me the order to go, for I am already ready to obey, and I will consider myself blessed to have been chosen for it." And so on September 14th, 1594, the Feast of the Holy Cross, Francis de Sales sets out on foot for Chablais. And something extraordinary happens. Chablais, capital city Tonon. Francis arrives and finds 20 terrified Catholics. The Calvinist magistrates refuse to receive him even with letters from the governor. Doors are slammed in his face. Insults, threats. "Go back to Rome, papist." First day, 0 conversions. Second day, 0 conversions. Third week, 0 conversions. He tries to preach in the town squares, but no one listens. He asks for public debates, but no one accepts. And then comes the first night in the open. There is nowhere to sleep. The temperature drops. Francis looks for shelter, but every door is closed. He sees a sturdy tree near the forest. He takes some ropes and ties himself to the branches, 3 meters high. It should be safe, but when night falls completely, he hears it. Howls. They come from the darkness. 7 hungry wolves surround the tree. The cold is biting, his fingers are frozen, and his breath forms white clouds. The wolves scratch at the bark, try to jump and howl incessantly. Francis prays. 5 hours until dawn. Every minute feels like an eternity. He thinks, Lord, if this is how my mission ends. But at dawn, a couple of Calvinist peasants pass by on the path. They see the Catholic priest in the tree, shivering, surrounded by wolves. They could have moved on. But something in the scene touches them. They drive the wolves away and help Francis down. The wife brings warm bread. The husband offers his home. Francis, with his lips purple from the cold, smiles and thanks them. In the following days, that couple listens to his words, and they convert, the first of 72,000. But the story does not end there, because the impossible was only beginning. Francis realizes no one wants to hear sermons, so he changes his strategy. He spends entire nights writing by hand by candlelight, leaflets that explain the Catholic faith with clarity and love. No attacks, no insults, just the truth. He and the 20 Catholics go out every night, silently, sliding the leaflets under doors. In the morning, families read them, some tear them up, but others keep them, and they begin to think. First week, 3 conversions. Second week, 12 conversions. Third month, 68 conversions. The news spreads. The Calvinist ministers become alarmed. They need to stop that priest. They summon a relative of a convert. Kill him. The man accepts. He invites Francis for a walk in a remote place. He carries a hidden knife, but Francis senses the intention. And when they reach the isolated spot, he turns and says calmly, "My friend, I know what plan you have. You have come here to assassinate me. However, do not fear, for if your religion leads you to kill friends and relatives, mine obliges me, following the example of Jesus Christ, to forgive the cruelest of enemies." The man is paralyzed. The knife falls from his hand. He kneels and asks for forgiveness. And then something impossible happens. The one who came to kill kneels to pray. He becomes a fervent Catholic. But it does not stop there. Conversions explode. From 20 Catholics, Thonon grows to have 200, then 500, then 1,000. In 3 heroic years, Francis faces snow, rain, hunger, 3 more assassination attempts, nights in the open, and ambushes. And every difficulty, instead of destroying him, generates more conversions. 25,000 people return to the Catholic Church. Churches are rebuilt. Crosses are raised again. Villages celebrate Mass. But in a region where such secrets do not last, the news reaches Rome. And now comes the impossible part. 1598, 4 years after that night in the tree. The conversions in Chablais continue to grow. From 25,000, they already pass 40,000 people returning to the church. The fame of Francis reaches the ears of Pope Clement VIII in Rome. The Bishop of Geneva is old, sick, and needs a successor, and everyone points to the young priest who did the impossible. But there is a problem. Francis is only 31 years old, too young for a bishop. So the Pope decides, I want to examine him personally. A trip to Rome. September 1598. Francis enters the Vatican. The College of Cardinals is gathered. Cardinals from all over Europe, renowned theologians, all there to witness. The Pope looks at that young priest and begins 35 difficult points of theology. Questions about grace, free will, sacraments, and predestination. The same questions that almost destroyed Francis years ago in Paris. But now he does not tremble. He answers with clarity, humility, and depth. First question, second, 10th, 20th. The cardinals look at each other, impressed. 35th question answered, silence in the room. And then Pope Clement VIII stands up, opens his arms, and exclaims, "None of those we have examined have deserved our approval so completely." Francis is appointed coadjutor Bishop of Geneva. December 8, 1602, the feast of the Immaculate Conception. He is consecrated bishop in the Church of Thorens. But Geneva is inaccessible, taken over by the Calvinists. So Francis establishes his see in Annecy, And now comes the part that no one expected. As a bishop, Francis could live in palaces, have servants and banquets. But he chooses simplicity. He visits each of the 400 parishes of his diocese, many in mountains that are difficult to access. He personally teaches catechism to children and adults. And then something extraordinary happens in Annecy. There is a young deaf-mute man in the city. No one can communicate with him. No one can teach him about God. Francis sees him and thinks, God loves him too. He spends months creating something unprecedented, a sign language, specific gestures for concepts of faith, infinite patience, days and days repeating and adjusting until the young man understands. Tears stream down the young man's face when he understands for the first time that God loves him. Francis prepares him for his first communion, and in his will he writes, "When I die, the Diocese of Geneva must continue to support this young man." In 1610, together with Saint Jean de Chantal, he founds the Order of the Visitation. He writes Introduction to the Devout Life, a revolutionary work that teaches lay people to seek holiness. He writes the Treatise on the Love of God, where he coins the phrase, "The measure of love is to love without measure." 20 years as a bishop, but the end of this story comes in Lyon. December 28, 1622. Francis accompanies the court of the Duke of Savoy on a Christmas trip. Upon arriving in Lyon, he is refused lodging at the palace. He chooses the gardener's hut at the Visitation Monastery. There, as humble as he always lived, he suffers a stroke. The last sacraments are administered in that simple room, 55 years of age, and before he departs, the final number is confirmed, 72,000 conversions in Chablais. 72,000 souls who returned because a man chose gentleness instead of force, love instead of anger, and forgiveness instead of revenge. His body is moved to Annecy, January 24, 1623. Crowds weep in the streets. The entire city follows the procession. And now, 400 years later, what happened to that man who survived the wolves? Beatified in 1661 by Pope Alexander VII, canonized 4 years later, in 1665, by the same Pope. Proclaimed a Doctor of the Church in 1877 by Pius IX, with the title of Doctor of Divine Love. The 72,000 conversions remained. Chablais, which was 100% Calvinist, became majority Catholic again, and it remains so to this day. But the story did not end in 1622, 19th century. Turin, Italy. A young priest named John Bosco is praying. He works with street boys, abandoned youth and orphans. He needs a model, a patron for the work he wants to found. And then, in prayer, he hears, "Our Lady wants us to create a congregation." What name should be given? John Bosco thinks of Saint Francis de Sales, that gentleness, that kindness that converted 72,000 without violence. And in 1854, the Society of Saint Francis de Sales is born. The Salesians. 17 young men at the start. Today, millions of Salesians in hundreds of countries, millions of young people educated in Salesian schools, all because of that man who spent a night in a tree. And there is more. January 26, 1923. Pope Pius XI proclaims St. Francis de Sales the patron saint of journalists and Catholic writers all over the world. Why? Because of the handwritten leaflets he would slide under doors in Chablais. The first Catholic communication campaign of modern history, Introduction to the Devout Life, written more than 400 years ago, is still a bestseller. Translated into dozens of languages, read by millions. The young deaf man he taught, his story inspired the Church to proclaim him also the patron saint of the deaf. And now, here today, 403 years after his death, the question is for you. Faced with the impossible, do you choose force or love? 72,000 conversions did not come from armies, imposition, or violence. They came from a man tied to a tree who chose to forgive the one who came to kill him. Because St. Francis de Sales teaches us something radical. The measure of love is to love without measure. And when you love without measure, wolves become opportunities. Assassination attempts become conversions. A night of cold becomes the gateway for 72,000 souls. Your impossible mission is waiting. The question is not whether you have enough strength. The question is, do you have enough love? Because testimony without risk is not testimony, and love without measure has no limits.